Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about how to tune your gear for speed. I've just received this new sail. It's a duotone warp for the 2021 season, and I'm going to demonstrate with this sail and with one of my boards how you can tune your gear to get more speed out of your gear, because there are quite some differences between slalom sailing and speed sailing when you look at how to tune your gear. And in this video I'm going to explain to you all the settings I use for speed sailing and how they differ from the slalom settings, because actually there's quite a few differences that I'm rigging my sail and board differently when I go speed sailing or slalom sailing. So let's go over it. But first let's roll out the sail. So what I want to do when I trim my gear is achieve two things. First, I want the whole system to be as controllable and stable as possible, so that I have the maximum control on my gear while speed surfing. Because having control is essential to getting fast speeds. And the second thing I'm looking for is creating as much lift as I can still handle. And that needs to be the right amount of lift. It cannot be too much, because then the board will tail walk and fly away. And if it's too little, the board will ride too flat and stick to the water, and you will not go very fast by doing this. So these are the two things I'm looking for when I'm trimming my gear. So the first thing when rigging up is obviously you have to choose how much downhaul you put onto the sail. And one thing I can say is, guys, don't trust what is written in the sail. They cannot give you the perfect length, because it depends largely on the rider, how heavy he is, what the conditions are. So it's really tough for the sail makers to give an accurate number for the downhaul. It can vary by like 2 centimeters plus minus. I have to say, on the duotone in the last years it was pretty spot on for me. Usually I'm around 1 centimeter away from what the recommended downhaul is. So you can use that as an approximation, but really try and figure out what the perfect downhaul is for you. So what I like to do, this sail for example, it's given with 412 plus minus 1. So I put my extension to 414, and I don't put the downhaul all the way through. I leave some space, like maybe 2 centimeters. But then when I'm on the water and I have the Power XT, I can still put on some more downhaul if I feel I don't have enough. If I put it to 412, so exactly what it is, I don't have any room to go up. So this is what I do. But on the last warps I usually went plus 1 centimeter from the recommendation to get the perfect downhaul for me, because for speed I like to have a little bit more downhaul in the sail. What you want on a deep downwind run is for the sail to open in the top, and you achieve that by putting a little bit more downhaul than what is recommended. So the general rule of thumb on a slalom sail is that usually for speed you need a little bit more downhaul to get the sail to perform better on a deep downwind course. And most sails now have this max mark up here, so pretty much you can pull the sail all the way through to the max mark, and it will be quite good for speed. So we talked about how you want the maximum lift that is still controllable in the gear, and doing that you can achieve basically by two things. The first one is that you have the correct height of the boom. And this is very individual on the rider, so you have to figure it out on your own. But what I can say, the lower you put your boom, the less lift you have, but the more control you have. The higher you put your boom, the more lift you have, but the less control you have. So finding the sweet spot here is really important. So when it comes to the height of the boom, I actually have another tip for you guys. When it's half wind, you should put the boom a little bit lower. And if it's really broad, you can put it a little bit higher up, because on a half-wind course you have a lot of pressure on your sail, and it will be easier to handle if the boom is a little bit lower. As we discussed, it will generate a little bit less lift, and that might actually help you on the half-wind run if you're struggling with keeping your sail and board down. In general, I like to put the boom around 5 centimeters lower on the speed gear compared to the slalom gear, because on the slalom gear I want maximum lift on all courses, and when speed surfing I actually want to be the fastest in the strongest gust. So in slalom, in the average wind, I want to be fast and is lower than what I'm using for speed sailing, because I want to be the fastest in the strongest gust. And I have the control if I put the boom a little bit lower. So for me, it's around 5 centimeters that I put the boom down when I go speed surfing compared to slalom windsurfing. The other key component that affects the lift on the complete gear is the mastfoot position. And if you want some lift, don't put it too far ahead. I usually like to put it pretty far to the back. That will give me a lot of lift, but of course if you feel you don't have enough control on the gear and the gear starts flying too much, you might want to consider moving the position a little bit more to the front. That will give you more control, but the board rides flatter, of course. So for speed surfing, I usually want a pretty deep profile in the sail, and because of that I don't really pull much on the outhaul. I pull maybe just a little bit so the sail is tight, but I don't really pull a lot. For me it's perfect when I pull until I feel just a little bit of pressure on the line, but I stop pulling immediately. So it's almost completely loose, and that way you have a very deep profile. And on most modern sails, when it comes to the outhaul, you have two options. One is lower, one is higher. On some sails you may even have 3 or more options where you can put the outhaul, and I usually take the lower one because it's the same principle here again. If I take the lower one, the sail has more room to breathe and open the leech. So on the downwind run it will be a little bit more dynamic, so to say. Of course if you have light wind you might want to think about using the upper position, because that will actually give you a little bit more power. But for speed sailing, when it's pretty powered up, I would recommend to always take the lower position. For me, I usually use 95% the lower position. So another thing I like to do with the slalom sails that gives me a little bit of extra speed, I check every batten and I also check the spacers to give me more profile in the lower part of the sail. And on the top part of the sail I actually wanted to open and breathe, so I put out all of the tension on the upper battens except for the top one where I put a little bit of tension again. So actually these new duotone sails have quite a nice feature that you don't need spacers anymore. So it's really comfortable to rig it up, so you can adjust the pressure on the cambers with this little tool, and you can just give more or less tension here, which is really nice. You don't have to rig down the sail, put the spacers, rig it up again, then maybe it's not correct. So I really like this feature. And yeah, so basically the lower batten I like a lot of pressure on, the second batten I like a lot of pressure on, the third one I put a little bit, and then on the upper ones I don't put any pressure anymore, except for the last one where I put a little bit of pressure again. And this for me gives me a sail which has really deep profile but opens on the top leech. Now let's talk about harness line position and length, which are also really important. And one problem I see a lot of guys having when speed surfing is oversheeting the sail with a backhand. And this can actually destroy the entire flow around your sail, and it will really slow you down in the lulls. So you hit a gust and you pull a lot on your backhand, and then the gust is gone and you get into the lull. And what a lot of people are doing is they're pulling on the backhand way too much, and that way they lose a lot of speed. So in order to avoid that as best as possible, what I like to do, I don't put the harness lines exactly where the pressure point of the sail is. I actually distribute the weight on the hands, that I have around 60% of the pressure on the forward hand, and I have only around 40% of the pressure or power on my backhand. That way I don't oversheet the sail so much, and it works really well. And talking about harness line length, I actually used 32-inch harness lines for quite a long time, as I thought that speed surfers were generally using long harness lines, and I have to tell you guys, that was a huge mistake for me. Actually, my friend Dennis de Pauw, he's a Belgian speed surfer who went over 50 knots already, so shout out to him if you're seeing this. He gave me the advice to use shorter harness lines, and for me that really worked wonders. Since I used shorter harness lines, my speed improved by 2 or 3 knots. And what that did for me is, before, when I was using longer harness lines, my body was actually too far out from the board. And if your body is hanging really far out, I'll put up a picture here, you're not generating the lift on the board which you need. So what you really want is, with that front leg, you want to create the lift on the board. And for that, the shorter harness lines helped me find a better stance. So before I was using around 30 to 32-inch harness lines, and now I'm actually using 28, or on the speed gear even 26-inch harness lines. And since I'm doing this, I gained a lot of speed, especially in light and medium wind. And yeah, if you're struggling with that, Just try using shorter harness lines. It's a little bit strange at first, but I think it will improve your speed. Just try it. So what obviously makes a lot of difference in the trim while speed surfing is having the correct fin. But this is a really complicated subject, guys, and I think I will do a whole separate video on this because it's a really important piece of your equipment and there's lots to consider when choosing your fin. Just in this example, this is the 44, and here I like to use a 21 centimeter asymmetric speed fin by finefin.com, and this for me generates the perfect amount of lift, but is still not too big. Sometimes when it's really strong I use a 20 centimeter asymmetrical, and if I'm using this board with a 6.2 I use sometimes a 22. So in between this range, this is more or less the perfect fin for me. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this more or less tech video. So to say, if you're looking for more speed content, there's actually loads of videos around speed and foiling and slalom on my channel, so make sure to check those out. And for now, I'll see you in the next one, guys.